This is the most talked about island in the world.
Taiwan.
They make the thing your smartphone, computer, tablet and ton of other gadgets literally can't live without. The most powerful cutting-edge microprocessors. The world's top companies buy them right here in Taiwan. But there is something even more important. Take a look at the Taiwan Strait. 80% of all global trade passes through it. But who does it belong to? Taiwan or its giant neighbor, China? In Beijing, they believe both the strait and the island are their property. For 70 years they've been making plans to take back and control all of this territory. So how did Taiwan ended up separated from China? Why does the United States need this island so much? And why does China really want it, but still can't bring itself to attack Taiwan and take it? So what's the big deal about Taiwan? You guys watching this video from all over the world, and wherever you are, the heart of your smartphone or whatever device you're using to play this video are very likely from Taiwan, because the most largest factory is here and it makes half of all chips, meaning hundreds of countries are buying something super necessary and important from there. And the ones buying the most are China, United States, Singapore, Japan, Germany, South Korea, the world's major economies. And fun fact, none of them officially recognize a state called Taiwan. Well, except for 14 countries whose names you probably didn't even know. Everyone, though, recognizes China, which, as I said, considers Taiwan its territory. And it's in their constitution. But on the other hand, on the international stage, the Taiwanese themselves call their country the Republic of China. And in their constitution, they say that the territory of Big China belongs to them, to this tiny island. This whole territorial mess goes back to a pretty curious chain of events. First, on the island and on the mainland, two different states emerge. How? The first half of the 20th century. Across China's vast territory, a civil war rages for 22 years, from 1927 to 1950. Who's fighting whom? Pretty typical for 20th century. On the one side, the communists, on the other, the nationalists. The historic face for one side is Mao Zedong, for the other, Chiang Kai-shek. Long story short, Mao wins and creates the Communist People's Republic of China, which the world today commonly calls China.
China.
Chiang Kai-shek loses, and to avoid being killed by the victorious communists, he and 2 million supporters cross the strait and end up on the island of Taiwan. There, Chiang Kai-shek creates his own state, which will never be called Taiwan. So what was it called then? You remember, Taiwanese themselves call their country the Republic of China. And it's that state, not the new communist China, that countries recognize in the United Nations. And not just recognize, the guys from Taiwan become permanent members of the United Nations Security Council. Just so you get it, there are only 5 such influential players in the world to this day. The United States, the Soviet Union, France, the United Kingdom and Taiwan. Yeah, but when and how does everything change? October 1971, at the United Nations headquarters in New York, they decide that this state with this flag, called the Republic of China, which had sat on the Security Council for 26 years, they were seen as World War II victors, recognized as China. Well, from now on, they're no longer considered China. Instead, these guys, with this flag, the ones their troops basically fought against in Korea, Now they are going to be permanent members of the United Nations Security Council. A clear illustration. That's how many countries in 1949 recognized Taiwan and how many recognized China. And how it all changed within 70 years. Now everyone's friendly with China and almost no one has official diplomacy with Taiwan. Why does that happen? Well, first, China today is the world's second largest economy. And with that status and influence, Beijing gives everyone a simple condition. If you recognize Taiwan, then you don't recognize us. Who can afford not to recognize China and pick a fight with it? Maybe the Pope or some pretty brave countries. Basically, everyone pretends Taiwan doesn't exist. So Taiwan tries to speak up loudly about itself. For example, in 2003, the island built what it was the tallest building in the world, the Taipei skyscraper. They constantly staged eye-catching events on the tower. Someone climbed it, someone jumped off it. Every year they host international stair races up to 91st floor. And even though Taipei skyscraper isn't in the global top 10 for height anymore, it's still one of the most memorable looking towers out there. Yeah, but that's China today. But why everyone switched to them in the first place? The most telling position belongs to the United States. They were the ones who first poured money and weapons into Chiang Kai-shek regime. Although there were never any democratic values to begin with. Taiwan was the perfect place to create, right beside communist China, a political and military pain in the ass. Or, as they say in politics, a counterweight.
His fervent dream, his compelling mission, is the defeat of communism on the China mainland.
But then the Americans start getting closer to communist China. Why? To create a counterweight to the Soviet Union. Stick with me. October 1970. President Nixon tells the British Times he dreams of going to China. In July 1971, the president's national security advisor, Henry Kissinger, flies to China himself, unofficially through Pakistan, but obviously for negotiations.
I have undertaken initiatives in several areas to open the door for more normal relations between our two countries.
And yet, in October 1971, the American representative at the United Nations votes against replacing Taiwan and China. In reality, America's vote didn't matter, so they could afford to back Taiwan just for show. However, in February 1972, a half year later, President Nixon in Beijing shaking Mao Zedong's hand. And on January 1979, the United States officially recognized China. Nothing personal, just business. And what's business got to do with it? Let's go back to Taiwan. Today they make the most complex and expensive semiconductors in the world. But in the mid-20th century, none of that existed. No companies, no semiconductors. What they did have was cheap Taiwanese labor. Yesterday's farmers great to do business with. At first they produced clothes and toys for the progressive Western world. Then they started assembling Japanese and American home electronics. But, I mean, how far can they really go with just 15 million people on the island? Doesn't quite make you a world factory. And China? There are 1 billion people there. So sure, getting closer to Beijing wasn't just about Cold War with the Soviet Union. It was about big money. One more thing here. The Americans officially stopped recognizing Taiwan. But they don't stop supporting it with weapons and investment. Why? I'll tell you later. So, where did Taiwan's business growth come from? And here's where one person matters to us. A perfect historical figure tied both Taiwan and the United States. You all know Steve Jobs or Bill Gates, but there's another guy on the same level. Morris Chang. He's the one who founded Taiwan's chip industry and turned the island into the world factory of chips, the gold rush of the 21st century. Chang was born in China in 1931, and when war ended and Chiang Kai-shek fled to Taiwan, Morris, then a young man, went to the United States. He first studied at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, one of the world's top tech universities. But more importantly, he then landed at Texas Instruments. There they created the first mass gadget of the 20th century, the Regency TR-1 pocket transistor radio. That's where the modern digital revolution really began. Starting in 1958, Morris worked as a regular engineer, and within 25 years rose to vice president. Naturally, he learned the chip-making process inside out and built relationships with the leaders of high-tech companies across America and the world. And in 1985, the Prime Minister of, at that moment, unrecognized Taiwan invites Morris Chang to move to the island and take charge of the Industrial Technology Research Institute. At that point, Taiwan was basically just a factory for spare parts. But across the strait, China, with its billion-chip hands, was already revving up. Obviously, Taiwan could lose that competition. They needed to think of something and act. So Chang proposes a strategic move: invest in the brains. With government money, he launches dozens of startups with one goal: designing and making the very things he'd worked with all his life: microchips and chipsets. And what did that lead to? One of those startups is Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, TSMC, which Morris Chang will personally head. Today, practically everyone buys chips from TSMC: Sony, Microsoft, Qualcomm, Nvidia, AMD, Apple, and Intel. But TSMC isn't the only child of late 80s revolution that happened in Taiwan. In 1987, Acer opens a division to design and produce its own chips. In 1988, Transcend appears, the ones who make flash drives. In 1989, Asus starts making its first motherboards. There's also Taiwanese HTC and monitor maker AOC. 40% of smartphone chips are produced by Taiwan's MediaTek. I'm not listing all this for nothing. High-tech is exactly what brings Taiwan its wealth and well-being, and many local companies have become clear leaders in their fields. 60% of the global auto industry depends on TSMC alone. Now, answer this yourself. Why does China need Taiwan so much? And why does the United States need it just as much? If Beijing gets all these production capacities and knowledge, China will be able to dictate any terms it wants to the world. Because the global economy now depends not only on oil, but on microprocessors. And the main consumer of chips is the United States. And to be fair, it's not that easy to just switch over to a different chip maker. Yes, you can't swap oil. Russian for Saudi, Iranian for Venezuelan, but there are literally just a couple of makers of cutting-edge chips: TSMC, Samsung, and that's all. And growing a chip is a long process. It literally takes months. Remember how I said at the beginning that it's not just about semiconductors. Here's the Taiwan Strait. It's the main route for ships heading from East Asian countries, Japan, South Korea, China itself, to the west. And in the other direction, the same strait carries energy, oil and gas. The Taiwan Strait is an international waterway, open to everyone. US Navy ships regularly pass through it. But if China takes Taiwan back, how many US ships do you imagine would stay once those waters are officially China's? In fact, the current status of Taiwan was best described by American general. Taiwan is an unsinkable aircraft carrier off the coast of East Asia. Later, he added, if we don't seize the moment and help Taiwan's government with weapons, the United States defensive line against the communist threat will run along the beaches of California. So the United States seized the moment, and now that line runs along China's shores. So could there actually be a war over Taiwan? Well, if you think logically, today nobody, neither United States nor China, is really want that war. Why? From a military point of view, landing on an island packed with American weapons means taking massive human losses. For example, back in the 40s, at the peak of its power, even Hitler didn't dare to land on Britain's islands. He just bombed its cities.
In the first raid, 400 German aircraft took part, raining bombs indiscriminately on the city, but nearly a quarter of them were shot down.
But the economic reasons matter even more. Look, China-US trade over the last year more than $750 billion. China trades with Europe is roughly the same volume. Together, over 1.5 trillion. No one else in the world has numbers like that. If anyone tried to start a war, all those trade links would collapse. Plus, remember, I've repeated a few times that the Taiwan Strait handles 80% of global trade. But if you shift westward, there is another interesting strait, the Malacca Strait, between Indonesia, Malaysia and Singapore. Global trade flows through it too, but that one's controlled by the United States Navy. So any attempt to impose your rules in one place will automatically trigger a mirror response in the other. And one more important point. No matter how much the number of Chinese patents has grown in recent years, the country still lives off borrowed American, European and Japanese technologies. So is it worth invading Taiwan just to lose access to them? That's exactly why United States intelligence keeps saying if China is preparing for war, it's not now, it's for 27, 30 or even 2050. Why won't Taiwan just join China voluntarily? Well, take for example these two dots on the map, Hong Kong and Macau. Today they're officially recognized Chinese territories, and to get them back from the British and the Portuguese, Beijing didn't fight anyone. They just waited, applied political pressure, and those places fell into their hands on their own. Yeah, China offered Taiwan the same thing as Hong Kong. You'll be part of our great state, but with autonomy, your currency and minor laws. But Taiwanese can see how China eventually tightened the screws. A sweet adventure like one country, two systems, where one of the systems will eventually get eaten, isn't something anyone's in Taiwan likely to accept now.
But Taiwan will also do whatever it takes to defend its freedom and democratic way of life.
Most likely, China will do what it usually does, wait it out. The Americans, meanwhile, will keep using the island as an unsinkable aircraft carrier to pressure China. See ya.